Welcome to another wonderful episode of A Deeper Dive. This is a series where I take a topic suggested by you guys and take as thorough and as deep a dive into it as possible. So if you guys would like to suggest an idea for a future episode of A Deeper Dive, leave them down in the comments below. And if you see somebody has already suggested an idea that you like, give them a thumbs up. Either way, you may be in the next episode. Today we're going to take a suggestion from Telek the Zombie Slayer, who asks, a deeper dive into the backstory of the giant robots. Why are they in Origins and in Stalingrad? So I think we should first establish that the giant robots did not exist in the zombie storyline until Origins. Prior to Origins, there was no mention, no reference of a giant robot, other than the fact that Der Riese, when translated into English, means the giant. But even that isn't a giveaway or a hint of a giant robot. The first time we ever learned about the giant robots in the zombie storyline comes from this letter from the field, which reads, November 19th, 1917. It seems beyond a doubt that Fritz is up to no good. Air reconnaissance suggests prototyped armored weaponry is being tested in northern France. Scuttlebutt reads like the ramblings of a madman. Strange lights in the sky, mysterious plague, even giant metal men. I'll be at the site within the week to learn the truth with my own eyes. This was a letter from the field written by Tank Dempsey as he's traveling to northern France to check out what's going on. He's talking about Origins and all the stuff that's going on there. The strange lights in the sky are all the different auroras. The mysterious plague is the zombification that's going over the area. And then the giant metal men, well, of course, those are the giant robots. We didn't know much about them at the time. We just kind of had hints, and then leaks suggested that there were going to be giant robots in Origins. Origins actually comes out, and we finally see the giant robots for ourselves, and we learn that the Germans had built a handful of them, and they're on the battlefield in northern France. We of course know of Thor, Odin, and Freya, and then there was a fourth one that was knocked over just outside the battlefield. It seemed as though, because the letters had described them as prototypes, and these were the only ones that we had seen, that there were only a handful of giant robots, and because they were only ever mentioned in Origins, which appears to be a different universe, and we now know is a different universe, is probably exclusive to that universe, what we would now call Dimension 63. That's kind of all we knew of them. We just knew that the Germans had built these giant mechanical men and they've been stomping over the battlefield and they're using them to get an edge in the war. So now we fast forward to Black Ops 3 when we get the Giant. The Giant is a new take on Der Riese, but it's essentially the same exact universe as the original Der Riese. We know this because of how the timeline is structured. We see Primus actually jump into the original timeline swirl. So then we get into the Giant, and one of the things we see hanging off in the distance is a giant robot head. This is when we first learned that the giant robots were not exclusive to Dimension 63. In fact, because this version of the Giant is based on the Giant that we saw in Der Riese and that original universe, then they are actually in the original Der Riese. And I guess the canon explanation is that they were there the whole time, you just can't see them. This is something I'm not a big fan of. I don't like how that works in the zombie storyline. I don't like this idea that Treyarch decided to add giant robots to Der Riese, so now we just have to assume they're there and we can't see them because they're behind a silly wall. I don't like it, but unfortunately that's how the zombie storyline goes. The giant robots are canon in both universes. We first learned about them in Origins, and they were built in that universe around the time of 1918, except in the original universe, the one that Der Riese and the Giant are set in, they have giant robots, but I'm assuming because we hadn't heard much of them, they were something that hadn't really been used that much. Maybe they're still in the prototyping phase, and that's why you see one head kind of just disconnected. And the Giant has also always been known as a factory, so I think what we learned from the Giant is that they were actually building them at Der Riese, and that's why it was a factory. So it wasn't just a research site, it was also a place where they were building and constructing the giant robots. And in this universe, the development of them maybe hadn't gone so far. Now we fast forward again, and this time to Gorod Krovi, where we learn from this radio that the Russians are actually stealing Group 935 tech.
Directive log 223.1. though it appears to be a slightly inferior copy of the German Riese model. The Russian Gigant robot has proven to be a formidable unit. Unlike the Riese, the Gigant is armed with a high-energy beam weapon, fired from the cranial dome. Like the Riese, its highly durable construction means it can withstand most conventional attacks. However, the robot was never designed to withstand dragon attacks, leaving it extremely vulnerable to their fire.
You can tell that the Russians had actually taken Group 935 technology and created their own robots when you look at some of the robots within Gorod Krovi. You'll immediately notice that they're a slightly different design, and they also feature a red star painted prominently on them, as opposed to, say, an Iron Cross, which was featured on many of the German giant robots. The thing is, these robots were pretty pointless. They didn't stand a chance against the dragons, and that's why many of them are dead on the ground in Gorod Krovi and not stomping about the battlefield like, say, in Origins. If these giant robots were pointless, why did Treyarch decide to include them in the map? I don't know, world building, but they're there. This is how the story goes. The Russians take the technology of Group 935 to build giant robots, while the Germans also had created dragons, and the dragons end up defeating the giant robots. So the Russians then create the mechs, which are better equipped and better suited to fight the dragons, and that ends up being the better answer, which is what you see Nikolai using within Gorod Krovi. They were the successor to the Russians' attempts at creating a giant robot. One of the things Sophia mentions is that the Russian giant robots actually shoot lasers out of their eyes, which is kind of weird because you never see them do that in Gorod Krovi, but you do see a giant robot shoot a laser out of his eye in The Giant, which Sophia specifically mentioned that their robots were unable to do. Why is that the case? It seems as though the giant robot within Darius, or the Giant, shouldn't be able to shoot lasers out of his eyes, but who knows? My best guess is that they were working on modifying the giant robots, and the giant robot that you see in The Giant is actually a prototype, one of the original prototypes of basically a Mach 2 giant robot that is able to shoot lasers out of his eyes. And this is why you can see the lasers shoot out of the eyes of the giant robot in The Giant, but not in Origins. In Origins, they hadn't really developed them to that point, but it seems as though in The Giant, they've taken what the Russians have done and tried to add it to their own robots, and that's what you see going on in The Giant. That is everything we know about the giant robots within the zombie storyline. This is why they were in Origins, this is why they were suddenly added to the original universe and then featured semi-prominently in Black Ops 3. I hope you guys enjoyed this and found it interesting. If you did, maybe give the video a like, possibly subscribe for more. I'm always diving into the zombie storyline, so if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy the next one. In addition to that, if you have an idea for a future episode of A Deeper Dive, please do leave them down in the comments below. And if somebody has already suggested a good idea, give them a thumbs up. What I'm going to be doing is going through and picking one of the comments with a good number of thumbs up so that I know this is a topic that many people are interested in and would like to know. I'm going to go, have a great day, and bye.